Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by our guest today, Dan Ahdoot, who has an incredible multitude of projects from his latest show on the Food Network, which he's hosting, Raid the Fridge, to the new season of Netflix's Cobra Kai, as well as his podcast, Green Eggs and Dan. And I wanted to start by talking about Cobra Kai because you've known the creators, Josh Held and John Hurwitz, for a really long time, and they actually wrote the character Anoush with you in mind and reached out and were like, we've created this character for you, and was interested from your perspective when you first got the character breakdown and started to get details on him, spaces where you really felt like they had created him for you and where you really felt that the comedy and his comedic sensibility also really lent itself to your work as a performer.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. Yeah, for Cobra Kai though, it was super nice of them and very generous of them. I've known those guys forever. We all kind of came to LA at the same time and started out at the same time and have been kind of growing together. I mean, they obviously in the writing realm and then me more in the performing. But we've tried to work together on a bunch of different projects before, and this was the first one where they were like, oh, this role could be cool because they know me as this kind of smug foodie. And they're like, oh, he can play smug, so let's make him a smug character. And funny enough, the last name so I have a lot of random connections to these guys too. Like Josh Heald's wife is like a distant cousin of mine, totally random. And her last name, her maiden name was Naruzi, which is the last name of my character on the show, Anoush Naruzi. Which was funny because someone came after me on Twitter once and was like, why couldn't they get a Southeast Asian to play this role? Netflix, what's wrong with you? And I was like, guys, this role was literally written for me. Naruzi is a Persian Jewish last name. I'm Persian Jewish. We're 0.00001% of the world's population. Like, I know you're trying to cancel me, but not over this.
I remember that. It was the best response ever because it was just pure facts.
Yeah, I was like, you're coming after the funny thing is, after I wrote that to her, she responded like, oh my God, I can't believe you replied to me. How are you? I was like, you just tried to get me fired and now we're friends? Like, people don't realize there's like a real person on the other side of the tweet. But yeah, no, it's been honestly such an insane role just because we started it out on YouTube, and no one was watching it. I mean, people were watching it, but relative to now, no one was watching it. And we felt like we were a part of this really special thing that no one really knew about. And I'd keep trying to convince my friends to watch it. And I'd be like, you guys got to see this show. It's amazing. They're like, great. How do we watch it? I'm like, you go to YouTube, you open an account. They're like, nope, hard pass. But then it moved to Netflix. And now it's like the number one show in the world. And it's insane. Like I get DMs from people in like the mountains of Pakistan who were like, we love your show out here. I'm like, how do you guys even get reception up there? So yeah, it's been definitely a bizarre, wild experience to be a part of it.
It's amazing, and you've spoken a bit before about how the scripts are so tight and so specifically written that it not only gives you the voice and the tone of a scene, but it also really gives you such an inclination as to the timing and the beats of it. And so, how do you find that the language and the way that the scripts are written so specifically, with even the rhythm in mind, really helps you in terms of figuring out your performance, especially when you are in moments where you're maybe just coming into a scene to kind of like add a certain dynamic or evolve the tone of it or bring in a comedic moment or relief.
Well, it's funny because a lot of shows that I've acted on, like the creators aren't necessarily comedy writers. Like they're great writers, but they're not comedy writers. So they rely way more on like our improv and stuff like that to bring the funny. But these guys are like super seasoned comedy writers. And so they know how to bring in the funny. I mean, we do some improv here and there, but it's mostly just like, it's written so well, we don't really need to mess around with it. But also, my co-star in it, Brett Ernst, who plays Cousin Louie, like he's also a stand-up comic. So we're both stand-up. We're the only stand-up comics in the show. So we riff off each other. We know exactly how to play. We perform together now too. So like we know exactly how to riff off each other and how to mess with each other, which just kind of I think just adds to the flavor of the duo.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about the scene that you had where your character was beaten up by Johnny and you were working with Billy on that because I believe you actually turned down having a stuntman step in for a lot of it, but maybe had a few regrets about that by the end of shooting
Yeah.
it.
It was a
That
really
was
dumb move. Like they had a stuntman come in. He was dressed exactly like me. He was like a better looking version of me in the same suit. And I don't know why. I was like, I mean, I know I do some martial arts. I have a blue belt in jujitsu. So I was like, guys, I do jujitsu. I can do this. And they're like, great, if you want to do it, awesome. Meanwhile, the scene is like me getting thrown up against the car and getting my arm twisted behind my back. And Billy Zabka, to his credit, takes his acting very seriously. So he was like chucking me into this car and like twisting my arm like to a couple inches before it breaking, like my shoulder. And I didn't want to be the wuss who's like, can you take it a little easy on me, Mr. Zabka? So, and we shot it like 15 takes, and by the end I was like, this was a very poor choice. Never again. There's a reason The Rock uses a stuntman in every scene, even though he's like a WWE wrestler. It's like, nah, I don't think I need that anymore in my life.
was that one of the first times that you had done stunt work, or have you done it a handful of times before for other performances?
I mean, who can forget my iconic performance as Falafel Phil in the Disney hit show Kickin' It? In that was actually also a martial arts show, so there was a couple things that I did myself there too, but nothing like this where like I'm getting my ass kicked by someone who's like one of my childhood idols, and I'm like, this is awesome, but it hurts so much, but it's awesome, but I'm in a lot of pain.
I love that you're bringing up that show because you had such an interesting journey with that where you didn't even essentially want to audition for the role. You thought that it was a little bit problematic. You know, you've spoken about the reflection of that. But then once you were cast, there kind of wasn't really any way that you could get out of doing it almost. And but at the same time you've really leaned into a lot of the positive elements that came out of it. But I was interested in what it's like to be working on a show with a role that you felt reticent towards, and that journey and that path of really finding the positive aspects and leaning into that, and kind of leaving the rest of it by the side as you're working on the show and as you build those relationships and collaborations as well.
Yeah, it was a weird time because it was my first acting gig ever, and there's this weird thing for actors where like you don't have the freedom to be super selective, especially in the beginning. You have to take whatever you can get, and like that was what I got, and it was like, in hindsight, a character like that would never be written now. It was pretty racist. It was pretty problematic. It's probably a better way to describe it than racist, but it had questionable race elements to it. I had a hacky Middle Eastern accent. I ran this falafel restaurant. There was a goat that was the chef at the falafel restaurant. And pretty quickly, it was a blow to my pride, and it was tough to do. But, there's so much positive that came out of it. And I almost like developed like Stockholm syndrome in a little way with the character, because I was like, I can just play goofy. I can be wacky and weird. And also I was like learning how to act on a set, like how to do multicam and how to hit your mark and who the DP is and who the first AD is, and learning all these terms which I didn't know. So if anything, it was kind of like if you can act on a Disney show, it's like acting boot camp, because they're just churning these episodes out really quickly, and it's like you're kind of under the radar, and it's great experience. So and funny enough, like I transitioned into developing TV shows, and I tried to develop all these TV shows based on things that I thought were funny, and nothing sold. And the first thing that sold was when I was like, what about a concept based on my life as this guy who considered himself a highbrow comedian who's suddenly playing Falafel Phil, this kind of hacky Middle Eastern character on a Disney show. And it sold right away to Fox, and it was like, and then it's also going to be a story in this book I'm writing. So I don't know. I feel like our careers are so full of, can we curse on this?
Yeah.
There's just like so much bullshit that comes our way that if you let it bring you down, like you're just going to get really depressed and probably quit. And I think that like the key to this is being able to take all that bullshit and like find something positive in it, whether it's like meeting a writer on it that you end up collaborating with, or anyone on it, that you become a friend, someone who becomes a friend of yours. Like, but yeah, so I think like any product I've ever been on, even if I hate them, like I'm like, all right, cool. How can we turn a little bit of this into lemonade? And some of my biggest mentors now were people that I met on Kickin' It, who are like I've collaborated with on different projects that I love. So yeah, I don't know if that answers anything, but it's I guess it's kind of a way that I've always tried to look on the bright side, no matter how shitty it might feel in the moment.
I really appreciate that. And you were mentioning before that it was multicam series as well. There's a lot of specificity that comes with performing in multicam. And for you, what were a lot of those learning curves and really figuring out, even when it comes down to the choreography and the blocking and what the camera needs from you and your performance and working in a multicam setting?
Yeah, well, I love multicam just because as a stand-up comic, I feel like it's very natural for us. Like the joke structure is very like, but up, but up, but up, but up, but up, but up. It's kind of like stand-up, like set up punchline. And then also just like you're trying to get a laugh out of the audience. You're trying to make little intonations. It's funny, like I'm pretty good at multicam, but like I did this show with Kevin James last year. It was called The Crew. It was on Netflix for a season. But seeing someone like him who's been on multi for like 8 years is like the king of multicam. Like I saw in front of a live audience, like little tiny tweaks that he would do to get an extra laugh. And it was like, I don't know, it's so cool to me. Like it's almost like a puzzle. Like what are the little tweaks I can do to get that extra little laugh? And so I love it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of multi. I know it's kind of old school, but like, again, it's like there's something about just filling something up with as many jokes as you can, which I think is really cool. Just because like a lot of the comedies that we watch now are like I put comedy in quotes because they're not quite funny, but there's fun aspects and they're funny-ish. But like for something to just be joke, 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 like the stand-up in me really gravitates towards that.
And I wanted to talk about your podcast, Green Eggs and Dan, because I think what's so brilliant is that you're bringing on people that you have a pre-existing relationship with, and yet it feels like you're inviting us into the intimacy of that. It never feels like it's an insider's club and we're just looking in from the outside. And I think that's a really challenging balance to strike when you have that dynamic, and to really make sure that you're always finding it that way, and utilizing and leaning into the relationship in a way that the audience is part of it. And is that something that you think about when you're making the episodes, or was that just something that you really naturally found within the dynamics when you were recording these?
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. But first off, it's like, so the podcast is like a food podcast where I interview celebrities based on a picture of what's inside their fridge. And honestly, like I don't do well in front of celebrities. Like I get really nervous and I get stupid and I say dumb shit. And I realized that whenever I would meet celebrities and I didn't know what to do, I would just kind of talk about food. And that was like my in. Like I knew that because I know all about food, I could go toe to toe with them on food. We could talk about, I've definitely been to their favorite restaurants because all I do is go to restaurants. And that became like my way to like relate to people. And so yes, like I want it to come off as like, yeah, anyone can join this conversation, because it's literally what the kind of crux of the podcast was. Because like these conversations are the only conversations I can have with celebrities. Like I'm not good at talking about your career. I get weird. Like Ralph Macchio is a great example. Like I met him. The guy was like my fucking childhood idol, right? And now I'm working with him and I'm acting stupid in front of him and nervous. Start talking about food with him, find out he's an enormous foodie and a big wine nerd, and we just start going off. We've become such good friends. Like, we're going to eat together next time I'm in New York. And, like, if I tried to, like, talk to him about his career and, like, tell me what it was like to be in My Cousin Vinny, I'd be, we would not be able to, like, develop that type of relationship. So, like, I think everyone can relate to food. Everyone loves talking about food. A lot of people, like, they like talking about especially people who talk about their careers all the time, they love talking about something else. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I mean, that was my way of getting into that, because that's literally, I always felt awkward and on the outside of those conversations. So it was like my inside conversation for, everyone to hear.
What does the pre-production aspect of recording these episodes look like for you? Are you wanting to go into these conversations completely organically, kind of not necessarily knowing where the conversation is going to lead, or are you wanting to plan out certain aspects and have a, like, not a script, but a framework in mind?
It's pretty organic. I mean, I get the pictures of the insides of their fridges pretty early on, so I can, go through them and circle things that, like, oh, look at that, there's like that big thing of expired yogurt, like, let me make fun of them about that. And then it just kind of goes naturally from there. Although there was one episode that was really down to the wire. I got Henry Winkler to be on the podcast. And I didn't know Henry Winkler. I have no idea who, I know who he is, obviously, but I have no relationship with him. So I'm nervous as is because, like, we're not buds. And I jumped through hoops to finally get him on the podcast. And 5 minutes before we're supposed to start recording, I get a message from his assistant, and she's like, yeah, Henry doesn't feel comfortable. I still didn't have the fridge pics. And she was like, yeah, Henry doesn't feel comfortable sending you a picture of his fridge, but we'll be on the Zoom in 3 minutes. Can't wait to talk. And I responded, I was like, we can't do this. We can't do the podcast if we don't have the fridge pic. That's the whole crux of the podcast. And then she got pissed at me. She's like, how dare you? Henry put time aside for you, in his busy schedule. I'm like, I love it. I'm down. But like, literally, we can't, this is the whole concept of the podcast. And I was like, can we compromise? Send me a picture of the door, of the inside door of the fridge. And then like 30 seconds before we're about to start, I get a picture of, like, a blurry picture of the inside of the door of the fridge. And we did the podcast and stuff, and it was fine. But it begs the question, what the fuck is in Henry Winkler's fridge? Well, what are you hiding from us, Henry? Are there, like, severed heads in there?
But I love that off the back of the format of the podcast, that your new show, Raid the Fridge, it feels like that show was explicitly created for you, because again, it's all about that fascination of looking at the outside of someone's fridge and figuring out what might be inside of it, what it tells us about people, and was just interested because the show has that really nice dynamic where it is the competition, but it doesn't feel cutthroat. It feels like the contestants really kind of also get the opportunity to kind of build a bond with one another, that they're really interested in what one another are doing, what recipes are they creating, what ingredients are they using, rather than it being about jealousy and competition. And so how did you and the creative team really discuss and think about the format and the way that you wanted the show to really come across with that dynamic within a competition element?
Yeah, so the Food Network approached me, and they're like, we have this show, Raid the Fridge, we want to do. And they wanted it to be a serious food competition show. And I got to tell you, I'm like tired of the serious food competition show. Like, why all the drama? I just don't understand. Like, everyone relax. It's always like these dramatic names like, welcome to Kitchen Genocide Death Battle Royale. And it's like, why? It's like the lighting is dramatic. It's like, you're not curing cancer, you're curing salmon. Everyone just take a beat, relax. And so I told him, I was like, look, if you want to make it a dramatic food competition show, you can get a different host. You can get someone who's way better looking, who's got way more gravitas. I'm not that dude. But if you want to make a funny version of a food show, like, I'm down. Let's do it. Like, I've always wanted to do that. So they, to their credit, allowed us to do it. And we basically, like, again, it's like, if you watch it, the chefs are legit chefs. Like, they're real award-winning chefs. They're amazing. But it doesn't have that same, like, we have your family hostage, and if you lose, your nephews are gonna lose a toe. Like, it's none of that. But again, like, you learn something. It's fun, but the funny thing is, like, they're not really used to doing comedy, and I had written, like, a pilot episode, and I wrote a lot of jokes for, like, the intros and the outros and this and that. And we were about to start production, and they were like, and I was like, wait, we're shooting one episode a day. How am I going to write all this stuff for the other episodes? And they're like, you can just come up with it on the fly. Like, I feel like people who aren't comedy people just feel like you just do it. Like, it just comes up. And I'm like, that's not how this works. And it, like, became the most grueling schedule where I would, like, wake up at like 7 a.m. I would write in my place till 9, get in my car, drive to set, shoot straight until 10 p.m. And then during lunch, I'd go into my green room and keep writing and keep writing and writing. Like, there was no free time. And then I'd come home, write for another half hour, go to bed at 1 a.m. And it was just like, it was the most insane shooting schedule ever, because it was like really joke heavy. I mean, if, for the next season, we're definitely going to have like some sort of writer's room or something. But it was also like super gratifying. Like, it was my two passions, like, finally, like, I read in this, like, one of these, like, self-helpy books, like career self-helpy books, that it's a lot easier to become successful at something if, rather than be the best at one thing, you'll be kind of good at two things. Like if you're really good at two things, you have a much better chance of being successful than if you're great at one thing. And I kind of I looked at that and I was like, well, I'm never gonna, I'm a good comedian, but I'll never be as funny as like Bill Burr or Chris Rock or whatever. And like I know, a lot about food, but I'll never know more about food than like, Gordon Ramsay or Ina Garten or something. But I might be one of the funniest comedians who knows a lot about food. So like since reading that, I was like, oh, let me lean into that, which is where the podcast came out of, which is where this show came out of, which is where the book came out of. Like everything kind of started to click because, again, it's like when you have a niche that no one else can have, then, sky's the limit.
That's really wonderful. And I love hearing all about the fact that you were writing the scripts because there's such an organic authenticity to your presentation style on the show. And I think that really, really comes across and connects with the audience in a way that doesn't always happen because there's different stylistic approaches that you can take in terms of hosting and presenting. And was that something that was really important to you from the get-go, that it really just be about that authentic connection and that authentic portrayal of who you are and your personality coming through?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That was the whole reason I wanted to do this show, And again, it's like, there were reps of mine who were like, "Why do you want to be in the Food Network so badly?" I'm like, "This is my dream come true." I have been obsessed with the Food Network since I was a kid. Like, I want to have a show on the Food Network, and I want to make it my own. Like, I want it to be fun and different and a little kooky and weird. And like, the first episode has like a cocaine joke in the first like 30 seconds, which, might sound like nothing to you guys, but like for the Food Network, that's like throwing an atomic bomb on a show. Like that's an insane move on their part. And like to their credit, like, they're taking some chances on it. So yeah, like this is 100% tonally. I wanted it to be a funny version of a food competition show because it just hasn't been done before.
Yeah. And in terms of the presenting as well, there's almost two different dynamics because as a host of the show, you're in service of the contestants and of the judges and really facilitating everything that's happening in the room. And then you're also facilitating the audience and connecting to us and bringing us in. And so there's delivery that happens in conversations with people that we're voyeuristically watching. And then there's moments where you're also addressing the camera and you're addressing the audience directly. Was it easy to determine when you needed to kind of go in each of those directions, going back to what you were saying before about multicam and as a stand-up comedian, it just being a very natural thing to kind of address every aspect of the room?
Oh, I love breaking the fourth wall. It's my favorite thing in life. I do it everywhere that I can. And so to be able to just like look into camera is great. Unfortunately, when I'm doing like an acting thing, I'll do that. I'll look in camera. I'll be like, "God damn it, guys, can we reshoot that? I was literally staring at the camera." So I love being able to look into the camera. I mean, look, I think that just adds a fun element of like everyone like relax. Like we're not creating cold fusion here. We're having a very fun time. And I think it's fun to do nods to the audience so that they kind of see that, So I don't know. I mean, that kind of just came about organically, I guess, but I just want it to be different from everything that's out there. And that's just kind of part of doing that.
And lastly, I wanted to ask a little bit about that journey of really discovering your voice as a stand-up comic, because I know that when you were touring colleges, you mentioned that you were doing about 165, 170 shows a year, and that's a huge volume of shows, and it's really nonstop, but also a really wonderful opportunity to get to go to so many different locations, have so many different audiences that you're connecting with, and really kind of learn to read the room as well as discovering what your strengths are and where your voice lies as a comedian. And so what was that journey of really discovering your strengths and really finding what you wanted your voice to be within the industry?
It's funny. I think I'm one of the rare comedians who's like, I want to have mass appeal. I enjoy having mass appeal. And I think the reason is because when I was touring in those colleges, like I saw it as almost a challenge. Like it's easy to do really well in LA and New York if that's where you're from and that's where you come up. It's a lot harder to do well in the middle of Iowa in a cafeteria with, performing for people who have never met a Jew before or have never met an Iranian before. And I saw it as almost a challenge. I saw it as almost like I'm an ambassador for my people. And, I just saw it as like a cool way to relate to people and to bring them into the fold. Like, I did so many shows around the country where people came up to me after and they were like, I never, and this is like, you know, years after 9/11, where people were like, I've never met an Iranian before. And like, I had no idea that, you know, you guys could be like this. Like, you know, it sounded weird, but like, I don't know. I've always been a fan of like bringing people on into the conversation by flanking them rather than hitting them over the head and being like, you need to be nice to my people because da da da. Like, if I can make you laugh, then you have, you know, you have no choice but to be okay with my people. You know what I mean? So like that to me has been way more of an impressive thing to do and a fun way to do comedy. So anyway, yeah, like that's a long way of saying like I kind of honed my skills of like, you know, I performed for like Mormon groups in Utah. I performed for like Black student unions in Atlanta. I performed for Muslim groups in Detroit. I performed for Jewish groups in, you know, Ann Arbor. Like I just feel like by being able to be in front of all those different crowds, young crowds, old crowds, clean crowds, dirty crowds, like you really can, yes, you develop your own little voice, but you also realize how you can take your voice and kind of shift it in little ways to get everyone on board. And once you get them on board, you can take them anywhere you want.
I think that's really wonderful. And I'm so impressed by the incredible multitude of projects that you always seem to be diving into, and really appreciate you sharing all of this. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Honestly, it's like a lot of people think I'm prolific. It's more just because like shit gets canceled so much that you just gotta keep being one step above it. So thank you. I appreciate it.